Mount up! We're coming!
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider, the Super Bowl post-game edition in which we mostly talk about Viking stuff because what the heck was that? I mean, look, next time, Roger Goodell, rig it. Rig the Super Bowl next time, Roger. Don't let this happen again. The refs, they barely got involved. What were you doing? You could have had the refs give Kansas City a chance. All you had to do was call defensive holding and personal fouls on every single play, and maybe the Super Bowl would have been a lot better for us. Wow. That was one of the worst Super Bowls that I have ever witnessed in my entire life. In fact, I thought that maybe I was in Arizona again watching the Vikings play the Rams, but actually the Vikings played better against the Rams than Kansas City just did against the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. And I can't imagine that that sits very well with Minnesota Vikings fans, but at least what the Eagles championship does is it provides truth. It clarifies everything for the Minnesota Vikings. It says, here is the standard. It is the Philadelphia Eagles with this roster from top to bottom. Now go chase it. Go try to match what the Philadelphia Eagles have. And the biggest takeaway from this game, hands down, all of you know exactly what I'm going to say, is the defensive line of the Philadelphia Eagles. It was basically the 2020 Super Bowl all over again, where Tampa Bay's defensive line destroyed the offensive line of the Chiefs, and Patrick Mahomes, as great as he is, an all-time great quarterback, no question about it. I already saw, does this hurt his legacy? No, it doesn't hurt his legacy. There have been plenty of quarterbacks that have bad Super Bowls, including John Elway and Peyton Manning and et cetera, and even Tom Brady came up short because of a defensive line performance. And pretty much every one of those where an all-time great quarterback comes up short is because the opposing D-line completely dominates. Even when you look at the time Peyton Manning lost to the Seattle Seahawks, which actually was another one of the worst Super Bowls of all time, 43-8, I think. What did Seattle have? They had a completely stacked defense overall and a defensive line that got penetration immediately, quickly, put so much pressure on the quarterback that he couldn't function. The same thing happened for Tom Brady against the New York Giants. And this is just another instance of when it's one game and they've got 2 weeks to get everybody back to 100% full health. Everybody's out there. All the game plan is laser focused on one weakness for the other team, which was the offensive line for the Chiefs having to shuffle things around. They talked a lot about how Joe Thuney played left tackle, but here's the correlation with the Vikings is that Cam Robinson was a fine player to bring in for a couple of weeks to fill in for Christian Darrisaw, but when he had to face off with the Los Angeles Rams and even with Detroit, they just were not able to do it. He wasn't able to hold up in the same way that Christian Darrisaw was. And the same thing for Joe Thuney against Josh Sweat and against the Philadelphia Eagles defensive line. If the Vikings were considering building a defense similar to how they have in the past, which has been, I don't know how many years now, of Harrison Phillips, or before it was Delvin Tomlinson, and just whoever is around, Shamar Stephen, Jonathan Buller, Jerry Tillery, we know the names of the guys that they've just kind of thrown out there. Kyrus Tonga, just guys, right? And a lot of run stuffers in the interior. And it was really good last year for run stuffing. And it was really good for moving blockers to get blitzes to come up the middle. But if you want to have the best defense, not just a defense that's pretty good and then gets beat by Matt Stafford, gets beat by Jared Goff, if you want to have a defense that's great, it's got to be everybody up there. It can't just be pressure from two guys on the edges all the time and blitzes. Because when you send blitzes, it opens up holes and it opens up gaps in the defense. It's a good thing to do occasionally, but there's nothing stronger ever. And nobody knows this like the Purple People Eaters. There's nothing stronger than having a front four that can completely dominate and take over a game. And even if you're playing one of the best quarterbacks of all time, he got sacked, 3 times in the first 6 plays or something? I mean, it was crazy how quick that pressure got to Mahomes. And then the other part of it too is that, Mahomes likes to scramble. He likes to make plays. He's moving around. He's trying stuff early on. But when you have 4 guys doing that much damage, what does that mean? You've got all the spaces of the defense covered. And that's exactly what happened when Cooper DeJean, shout out to all the Hawkeye fans in Minnesota, Cooper DeJean could have called fair catch on that one and picked it off and ran. Yeah, I'm not the only one to make that joke, but he was wide open. He saw it. He came into Patrick Mahomes' vision late and picks it off and runs it for a touchdown. And that was pretty much the ball game. And a lot of people were saying when they got down 10-0, okay, this is where Mahomes really starts. But it's even more impossible to come back in a game when you have no run game. And you can't control the game by being plotting and methodical when the other team has only 4 guys dedicated to the rush and everybody else can rally to the football and tackle. Everybody else can cover all those spaces in the defense. And what we end up with is a total wreckage of the Kansas City Chiefs offense and the Philadelphia Eagles with one of the most dominant and impressive playoff performances in NFL history. And it's funny to think about the Los Angeles Rams, and I know it was weather aided, but the Los Angeles Rams, who destroyed the Vikings, ended up giving Philly by far their closest run. But against Washington, they demolished them. Against Kansas City, it was nowhere close. And that roster for the Philadelphia Eagles is going nowhere, and they're playing the Vikings next year. They have all of it coming back. Milton Williams is a free agent. They might keep him. They might just re-sign him. He might want to come back to the team that just won the Super Bowl. We sort of have guaranteed that certain players are free agents, but we don't really know for a couple of weeks the exact free agent list. We're only working off the players expected to be a free agent, but boy, Milton Williams would look good for the Minnesota Vikings because he is another player that gets penetration, gets up the field, and makes plays from the interior. And when you think about how few teams really have good guard play, and it's been the obsession of this show, it's been the obsession of the fan base because it's been so destructive to the Vikings offense, you get in games like this. This had to look so familiar to all you guys. How about Akeem Hicks? How about Kenny Clark? How about Grady Jarrett? How about all the times that the Vikings have played this exact game and lost this exact way when the chips were down, including to the Los Angeles Rams? So it goes both ways, and there has to be investment on the interior of the offensive line and the interior of the defensive line. And if they put every single dollar into that this offseason and patchwork the cornerback group, I'd be okay with it. They patchworked the cornerback group last year. They survived. I don't think that you can be a difference-making defense or a truly dominant offense without the interior. And for the longest time, we have talked about these things as if they were the non-important positions. It's all corners, receivers, edge rushers, quarterback. Okay, well, those positions are still incredibly important. But I think that it's changing a little bit because if the defensive tackles are getting paid $30 million a year at their best, $27 million for Christian Wilkins last year, and if the defensive tackles are taking over games like this, and I know Josh Sweat was incredible as well, and so was Jalen Carter and the whole D-line. But if D-lines are taking over, then I think it's just as important that you have players who can give you a chance to counteract that. And if the Chiefs, they had a domino effect here. If the Chiefs had an offensive tackle, then they wouldn't have to play their guard at tackle, and they would have been a little bit better on the interior. But even then, they never really had an explosive offense all season long. And then all of the weaknesses got exposed. What else did they not have this year, the Chiefs? They got to the Super Bowl without a run game that was really effective. In fact, the most effective runner that they had in the AFC Championship was Patrick Mahomes, and he wasn't able to do that today. But I think the first 20-something plays from Kansas City, maybe 2 were runs. They just had no run game to at least back off the Philadelphia Eagles, and Washington had that with their quarterback, with Jaden Daniels. He also was able to find some short passes, but for whatever reason, Kansas City and their RPO and their screen game and all that stuff, it just got tossed right out the window. And then they were down early and tried to run on back-to-back plays. It went absolutely nowhere. And then they try to force it, and then it's turnovers, and then it's just all hell breaks loose from there. And we have this horrendous Super Bowl. But all credit to the Philadelphia Eagles with the best roster build that we've seen in a really long time. And I think Detroit did a great job of their roster build. The Vikings are on their way. There are other teams like Washington who's going to be on their way. I think the Packers are on their way. But the Philadelphia Eagles, they're drafting, and not just who they picked, but the amount of picks that they were able to accumulate over the years to take a lot of swings at these players. The positions that they spent a lot of capital on interior linemen. They spent a lot of capital on big, giant dudes from Georgia to play along the D-line. Outside rushers, they spent smart money on Zach Bond. They made a great trade for A.J. Brown. And they made the ultimate draft pick that the Minnesota Vikings could have made in Jalen Hurts. And this cannot be lost in this Super Bowl, that when we go back to a pivot point in Vikings history that got us to right here, I'm going to think about Jalen Hurts for a long time. I know Lamar Jackson was a guy that they could have drafted, but I always looked at that as, well, they already signed Kirk. They didn't know that Jackson was going to be available. He was considered a very raw prospect. I mean, okay, maybe that's unfair to say, why didn't you draft him? But the Vikings were coming off of a playoffs where they clearly weren't good enough in 2019. And then they went into an offseason where they were going to have to completely overhaul their roster. They traded Stephon Diggs. There was every reason to let Kirk Cousins play out his contract and draft a quarterback. And instead, because Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman were on the hot seat because they couldn't get along with each other or anybody else, they felt the need to extend Cousins in 2020 to a 2-year contract and not draft a quarterback. And instead, well, they got Justin Jefferson, of course, but instead they take a corner. And then we end up, here we are, with Jalen Hurts being the center of this roster build for the Philadelphia Eagles. And that takes them here to the Super Bowl, and Jalen Hurts wins the Super Bowl. And I think also we should not ever forget that at the NFL Combine, I was there for this, Jalen Hurts was asked, are you going to do drills at other positions? Well, I mean, he should just put that on a loop in his house of being asked if he was going to do drills at other positions, because now he's a Super Bowl winning quarterback, and they were able to build a lot of this roster because of Jalen Hurts, not just because of his rookie contract, which has already gone by, but also the way that they extended him. Now, in a couple years, it's going to be a little harder with Jalen Hurts, but what they did was they created this space for a Super Bowl window. And then Howie Roseman got on one of the best runs of drafting that I have ever seen in my life. And now you could say, well, the Vikings can't draft. But if you go back and look at the drafts before they did this, they drafted Sidney Jones, they drafted Jalen Reagor, they drafted Andre Dillard. So in drafting, your luck might be right around the corner. So maybe that's what's next for the Minnesota Vikings. But, you know, G.R. Dunn, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, said Darnold took way too much blame. I think that what we can do rationally is separate the discussion about Sam Darnold and the Minnesota Vikings' future and what to do with Sam Darnold versus what happened in the playoffs. Because now that you've watched this game, now that you've watched Justin Herbert, CJ Stroud, Patrick Mahomes, all fall victim to unbelievable defensive line play that has made it impossible for them to succeed. And you know that the Rams sacked Jalen Hurts and beat up that offensive line. They sacked Jalen Hurts 5 times. That's how good the Rams defensive line was. So it is not all Sam Darnold's fault in that game. It wasn't not his fault. He missed throws. He didn't make plays the same way that Patrick Mahomes didn't make plays in this game. But when you look at how Sam Darnold played, if your entire evaluation for Sam Darnold as a quarterback is based on that one game, then I guess when we look at Patrick Mahomes, we've got to say that he's just not any good. And look, I know priors matter. Of course they do when we're evaluating someone, but I think that it's been really unfair, some of the reaction to Sam Darnold's 2024 season. He played excellent football, but then a forever truth of the NFL, the forever truth is if that team is completely running over your offensive line, it is going to be darn near impossible for you to win that football game. And, you know, Phil, you could say that Darnold was holding the ball too long, but he's doing the same thing that he did all year, which was trying to make plays, just like Patrick Mahomes did in this game. Mahomes was spinning around backwards. It's worked for him so many times, but when they have a complete rush coming from all areas, pushing the pocket in, closing out any escape routes, it's exactly what the Rams did, only the Rams picked a few more spots to blitz than the Philadelphia Eagles did. I think it also shows you that Vic Fangio, you can try to copy it, but the genius of Vic Fangio is always having the sick defensive line. He had Khalil Mack, he had Akeem Hicks, he had Von Miller when he was in Denver, and then now Vic Fangio wins a Super Bowl with the Philadelphia Eagles and that defensive system that everybody else keeps trying to do, and they still end up, with the Vic Fangio being the one that can do it the best. So I think, I agree very much with Jonathan, who says dump every resource into the trenches. I just totally agree. This was a year where I think more than ever on the defensive side, defenses fought back this year, including the Minnesota Vikings with Brian Flores. Defenses this year, not really counting Fangio because he didn't have to with the Eagles, but defenses became more complicated. Think about what we saw in Arizona. All the blitzes that they sent against the Vikings, the guards and the linemen are looking around at each other. Heck, even Spagnuolo got Jalen Hurts early in the game to throw an interception because he got them to shift the protection the wrong way. And then he ends up getting them. I think defenses with their pass rushes, the number of defensive tackles, and guess what? There's like 5-6 more defensive tackles in this draft that are going to come into the league and be a problem. The defensive tackles are getting faster, they're getting quicker, they're penetrating more often, and then you have defensive masterminds who are changing coverages up, throwing blitzes left and right, and then offensive lines are having a lot of trouble if you don't have a truly great offensive line. And the other thing is too, I thought of this, that JJ McCarthy is probably going to have to be a running quarterback to really succeed. I mean, you look at what Jalen Hurts is as a quarterback. He's accurate down the field. He was in college. He is in the NFL. They love to throw those deep balls to A.J. Brown. He's got great touch on it. He executes the short stuff pretty effectively. But if he was just a passer, and this is kind of why they lost last year because he had that knee injury. If he was just a passer, straight drop back, he would still be a good quarterback. But I don't think he's holding Lombardi's trophy right now. His running in this game cannot be overlooked. He was a problem for the Kansas City Chiefs running the football. And with JJ McCarthy, I know they're going to want to have him in a glass box and they're not going to want to get their quarterback hurt, but he is fast and he is pretty big when he's at full strength. And he did run at times at Michigan. I think you have to be a running quarterback, because even as good as Philly's offensive line is, they've got throughout the playoffs at times. And one of their counters has always been the running quarterback. And not only that, when you can play the run game off of the running quarterback, it's just a lot more dangerous. So when JJ McCarthy takes over as a starting quarterback, then I think they're going to have to lean more into the run game than Kevin O'Connell has ever been comfortable with his quarterbacks before, because this year he didn't do it at all with Sam Darnold. I get why. Your backup was Nick Mullins and Brett Rippon, and you don't really want to start those guys, but I also don't see really a path to defeating defensive lines with this big of an edge if you're not going to have a quarterback who can escape and who can run away. So the Vikings the offseason plan has now become crystal clear. Now there's a lot of micro decisions, and we'll talk about them in the coming weeks, but it's crystal clear outside of the quarterback position. It is putting all the resources, as Jonathan said, into the best defensive tackle you can find. That's maybe a first round pick. I think because they're so sought after, there will be a ton of competition if Milton Williams is a free agent and Osa Odigizua. I think if those guys are free agents, that there's going to be huge dollars thrown around, but the Vikings might have to play in that sandbox where you do pay a guy $25 million a year because it's worth it. And if they were to draft one and pay another one $20+ million, it's not enough. Like, any number of defensive tackles that you can tell me that can rush the passer and get after people, it's not enough. Give me one more. That's where I want this to start. Because on the offensive line, I don't know that there is one simple answer that it's easy. Like we saw Kansas City, they get an injury, they get ineffectiveness from one guy, and they've got to move things around, and then, it happens. The Vikings got a guy hurt. It happens. It's not going to be perfect. They should still invest as much as they can. But I also thought tonight, they have one of the best guards in the league, Kansas City, and he couldn't do it alone. And even the best guards are at a mismatch still, and that was Trey Smith. So I don't want to see the Vikings, and I don't know if Trey Smith's even going to become a free agent. After this, I don't know if Kansas City can let their top guard walk out of the building. And if you're him, you're still playing in the Super Bowl in 3 straight seasons, which is probably pretty good for you. But I would not be in favor of the Vikings paying one guard and then patchworking the other 2 positions. I think that what you'd rather do is move on from Garrett Bradbury. I think he can be good in another situation where they throw short passes, but I don't know if a team that's going to have these long dropbacks, long play actions, double and triple moves down the field, that you can really ask him for 17 games, 18 games into the playoffs to block like that. It's just not who he is. It's not what he was drafted for, Garrett Bradbury. And I think that Bradbury, I just would have liked to have seen at any point, because I've been a defender. I think he improved a ton over a couple of years from what he was when he first started. And I think he's good in the run game and the screen game and the zone blocking and all that stuff. I would have liked to have seen at some point in his career for Garrett Bradbury to have guards, to be able to play with anybody that he's not teaching how to play football. I mean, this guy has played with Oli Udoh and Drew Samia and Blake Brandel and Ed Ingram and just the worst players at that position year after year after year, and never really had a chance to have good players around him. So I always thought that that impacted his production. But either way, he's still undersized, and teams still man him up with their top rushers, and it's still a problem. I think they need to blow that whole thing up, let Bradbury sign with another team where he's a better fit, and get 3 new guys where you spend $10 million each as opposed to 25 and then use 5 to try to patchwork the other positions. I think we really saw that. For how long I've been saying on the show, I feel like offensive line is a weak link type of thing. If you have one bad guy, you can probably work around it. If you have 2, you're just completely out of luck. And the Vikings have often had 2 or 3 not playing particularly well. And Darth Bobo mentions Kevin Zeitler. Yeah, I mean, that's the type of signing that might not cost you $25 million. Like, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Matt Pryor is another guy. Will Fries is another guy. I think it's pronounced Fries, might be Freeze, from Indianapolis. Like, there's a number of good guards, Tevin Jenkins, who I think are more along the lines of $10 million players who they need to get. But this right here, this Super Bowl, if you're Kevin O'Connell, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, anybody on the offensive staff, you should be in your football coach cave watching the Super Bowl going, we can't walk our team out there next year against the Philadelphia Eagles, and they're going to play them, and against all the other teams that are going to have chances to improve. Myles Garrett was on Radio Row saying, you know what, trade me to Washington. Guess who the Vikings play next year? Washington. Guess who's back for Detroit? Aiden Hutchinson. You know that Green Bay is going to try to improve on the defensive line. You know Chicago's going to try to spend money on the defensive line. So there are going to be a lot of teams on the Vikings schedule. They're going to play Baltimore. They're going to play Pittsburgh. There's a lot of teams that have dudes who are coming after your quarterback. And no matter who your quarterback is, it has to be better. So as far as the Super Bowl goes, there's not much else to say about it. It was a complete tail whooping that if the Vikings hadn't already decided, which I think they did on the offensive line, I think they did because O'Connell came out after the playoff game and said, yeah, we need better interior line. But where I want the wake-up calls to be the interior of the defensive line. Way, way too long. They've been treating that like you can patchwork it. Delvin Tomlinson's a nice player. He never rushes the passer. Great. Harrison Phillips, nice player, never rushes the passer. Great. You want to stop the run. It's important. They did a good job of it this year. It was important. At the end of the day, though, they didn't get after Matthew Stafford. They didn't get after Jared Goff, and there's huge holes in the defense because they're trying to blitz them all the time. Well, look at the quarterbacks that they have to face next year. It's Goff again, of course. It's Jaden Daniels. It's Jalen Hurts. It's Dak Prescott. It's Lamar Jackson. I mean, there's a lot of dudes who can play quarterback. And what's your only answer? Pressure. And the good news here, though, there is a silver lining. There's a movie about a Philadelphia Eagles fan called Silver Linings Playbook. So why don't we? Why don't we give the Silver Linings Playbook to this offseason and what we could take away from this Super Bowl for the Vikings? The silver lining is the Vikings have some of the hardest parts here already taken care of. Jonathan Grenard emerged as one of the best players in the league. Andrew Van Ginkel was second team All-Pro, had double-digit sacks. I think at the end of the season, we really saw Dallas Turner start to emerge to the point where you could feel like, okay, like there's something there. He wasn't completely off the field. I know some of you guys mentioned Lewis Seen is on the Philadelphia Eagles. That's tough. But anyway, Dallas Turner, he's going to get a bigger chance for next year. They've got edge players. They've got some intriguing guys that I'm going to be watching in training camp next year. Gabe Murphy, Bo Richter. I'm going to probably keep saying, don't sleep on Bo Richter. I'm going to be saying that this offseason. Like, he's an intriguing guy. He's a really good athlete, and he was great on special teams last year. So they've got some dudes at that position. And on the offensive side, they've got two tackles. I don't know if Christian Darrisaw will be ready week 1, but I would guess so after being hurt in the middle of the season. Usually the timeline for the ACL is not that bad. And then Brian O'Neill, who I know had a bad game against the Rams while he was dealing with an injury, but still one of the best tackles in the league. They have the edges already figured out. They're not going out and trying to get the hardest positions to find that are the most expensive, offensive tackle and edge rusher. Those are all set. They know they've got two of the best pairs of tackles and two of the best pairs. So tackle and edge rusher are very good pairs for them to have, probably in the top 10 of the league, if not top 6 or 7, as far as pairs of tackles and pairs of edge rushers. So that's the hardest part. And now in a offseason where there's a lot of defensive tackles who are available and there's a lot of guards who are available, they have to put their investment there over some of the other positions, which does lead us to another part of the conversation here tonight. Now, if you have other thoughts about the Super Bowl, feel free, but wow, just all week there was no vibe to this thing, and it was so much worse than we ever thought. The only thing that's good about it is there's no ref controversy, but there was nothing else good about this. It was just absolutely horrendous. And for the team to win, to be a team that Vikings fans don't like, is sort of a cherry on top for all of you guys in the crap sandwich that we all got served in this Super Bowl. And it wasn't even a fun lead up to the Super Bowl. Sometimes it's such an intriguing matchup, or there's such a great storyline. Hey, this guy needs his Super Bowl before he retires, or legacy's on the line for this guy. I mean, the three-peat, okay, I guess, but it doesn't really change anything about Andy Reid or Patrick Mahomes. There was no buzz to this thing all week long. The most exciting thing that happened at Radio Row in the Super Bowl had to do with Myles Garrett and nothing to do with this. So, it was a really good season. It was a really compelling and fun and entertaining season. And I'm working on an article, purpleinsider.football, everybody. I'm working on an article about everything that we learned as far as the 2024 season and just going through it. So much change. There's so much intrigue and so many exciting performances and fascinating teams. And then we get to the end and it's this. And that's why it did remind me of 1994 for all of you who are old, and probably, was it 2013 that was the Peyton Manning one where it just went nowhere? He fumbled, I think, on the first play of the game or something. As far as the halftime show, I will leave that opinion to all of you guys. I am a big fan of Kendrick Lamar and plan to go to his show in Minneapolis, so I am probably a little biased on that. But I thought it was a strong end of the show and exciting at the end, maybe a slow start. But if you're not a fan of the genre, then you probably weren't into it. If you weren't following his beef with Drake, then you truly didn't know what was going on and you missed a lot of the stuff. So, but everybody gets to have their opinion on the halftime show. That is not my area of expertise. But let's move on to something that caught my eye today, which was Adam Schefter's reporting on Sam Darnold. So Adam Schefter was going through the different discussions with quarterbacks. So he's talking about Russell Wilson. He was talking about Aaron Rodgers. Oh, that's another thing. Aaron Rodgers done in New York. And we can all make our jokes about Rodgers becoming the Vikings quarterback, but I don't really get the joke. Like, okay, Favre, doesn't make any sense at all. Not even the slightest bit, but like, okay, I guess. But Rodgers is done in New York. What a shame it was to see that fail. I'm heartbroken about it. I know everybody, all Vikings fans and myself here, we're all had our hearts in New York with Aaron Rodgers. And what a shock it was that such a great leader and such a wonderful guy took down the organization from the inside, got everybody fired, and then got thrown out the door. Who would have ever seen it coming? Anyway, so there's that. It doesn't have anything to do with the Vikings. And neither does Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, though I'm kind of intrigued about where Justin Fields will land and if Sam Darnold's emergence will make someone believe that investing in Justin Fields might be a good idea. And he wasn't terrible last year, actually, for Pittsburgh. They might as well give that a shot if they're not going to go after someone like Darnold. There still hasn't been anything about Kirk, although there was, I think, one rumor that he might end up with the Jets, which would be really funny because he used the Jets to jack up the price on the Vikings in 2018. He jacked up the price on his own team that he was going to and hurt their ability to do things in the future. Amazing, amazing business stuff from Kirk, but I guess New York would make some sense for him if he's still going to play. And these teams are so desperate that for quarterbacks that it feels like Rodgers and Kirk and Wilson are going to be playing and they'll be bad and their teams will regret it. And I don't know what the point is, but there's just not a lot of quarterbacks in the draft. I feel like I'd rather have Mac Jones and just, I don't know, not pay them or whatever. It doesn't matter. The update on Sam Darnold was Schefter said sort of quickly and softly they might want to bring him back, the Vikings. But the team that's really interesting is the Las Vegas Raiders for Sam Darnold. And to hear that was sort of affirmation about my opinion about the Raiders, which has been that they make the most sense of any team for Sam Darnold because the Raiders are bringing in experienced people. And by experienced, I mean really super old in Pete Carroll to lead them, but also experienced coaches. Tom Brady is part of that leadership group. And I don't think that the Raiders are the type of team who are going to bring in all these people and they want so badly to be back in the playoffs, back into relevancy. It's been so long for the Raiders since anyone has had to think about them or talk about them or care about them. Oh, and also it seems like Derek Carr might be available too. It's just a wild type of situation where it's a bunch of quarterbacks that nobody wants and that everybody overpaid over the last couple of years and are having serious regrets. It's very ironic. Like it's all these guys who were pretty good at a certain time and then all faded, but were expensive. And then their teams hated themselves for paying them big money. Atlanta, the Saints, the Broncos, the Jets, all just the all regret team. They should actually do in Hawaii like an all regret team skills challenge with Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, and Russell Wilson. And the winner gets to sign with whoever needs a quarterback. Anyway, so the point is that the Raiders make so much sense for the Vikings. And Schefter reporting that really pinged with me because I thought, how much would the Raiders be willing to give up for Sam Darnold? And are the Vikings really considering a scenario where they would say no to the Raiders? So think about it this way. If the Vikings were to franchise tag Sam Darnold before the tag deadline, which is in early March, so they tag Darnold and the Raiders call them and say, we'll give you a second and a 2026 third or fourth. I think the Vikings have to run to do that. They have to say yes. Like if they believe McCarthy is ready, and I've always thrown that there because that is a massive part of the discussion. And I've always been comfortable with the idea that he might not be and that Kevin O'Connell might not think that JJ McCarthy is ready. And if he doesn't, then they probably do have to bring back Sam Darnold. But let's just go down the road. If the Raiders are willing to give them a third and change, a second and change, then you have to run to say yes. Especially because if you let Sam Darnold go, you're going to get a third round comp pick the same way they will for Kirk Cousins, but you're not going to get it till 2026. And if you are talking to me about drafting a third round player in 2026, at what point does that player become good? 2028? Like you just can't think that far down the road. If they could get a second round pick for this year for Sam Darnold, then they would have a first, second, the comp pick third, and 2/5? And that's not terrible. That's not a terrible amount of draft capital. You can trade down in the first, you can pick up some more, and then you feel like you've had a real draft as opposed to what it looks like right now, which is almost comical. It's like where all the picks go. And Skol Vikings, I've never really bought Daniel Jones as a bridge quarterback. I'm always shocked when I see people down on the idea of Sam Darnold, but up on the idea of Daniel Jones. Like, what? Daniel Jones, his last 2 years have been way worse than anything Sam Darnold ever did. But anyway, not the point. So we're going to go down two different roads here, okay? So the first road is that he goes to the Raiders. And I think that it has to be, and Matt says they have 68 and 73. Okay, one of those is fine. And then throw in something for next year, and you've got yourself a deal. The Raiders then can bring in a quarterback who can play, and the Vikings can sign Jones as a just in case, not as in a having expectations. I mean, Drew, you're saying you'd love to see what Daniel Jones can do for the Vikings. To me, that's just crazy talk. Like, what? I don't want to see Daniel Jones. Oh, as a backup. Okay, as a backup is fine. You're not going to see him then in the best case scenario. I would be fine with him as a backup for JJ McCarthy as a bridge quarterback. But if there's this idea that McCarthy's not ready, and you're just going to throw in Daniel Jones and he's going to do the same thing as Darnold. I don't think that it works that way. He's nowhere near as talented, and he was way worse at his bad points than Darnold was when he was in New York or Carolina. When Darnold was in Carolina in 2022, he was downright good. And then he comes here and, plays pretty well. But if they can get that, it would be a huge win. Then you go on to your franchise quarterback. You spend all the cap space and the draft capital rebuilding the trenches. You find out if Cam Bynum wants to come back. You see what you can do with the cornerback positions, but they've got a couple young guys who are developing there. I don't feel as down on that as far as they've got Blackman coming back. I really like what I saw from Dwight McGlothern. So you bring in a couple of veterans there, and you've got yourself a pretty good-looking football team that can win as far as in the trenches better than they have in years past. Give your young quarterback every opportunity to succeed. I'd like to see them get a slot receiver. They have to deal with the running back situation. There's no question about that. So there's a lot to do around him, but it would clarify everything. It would make everything very clear. You'd have more draft capital, more cap space, and you know exactly where you're pointing your cap space laser and shooting it right at defensive tackle and guard and the interior, and off we go. On to the plan that we've been talking about forever. I mean, in 2018, when the Vikings signed Kirk Cousins, I remember talking about, a lot of the best teams that are going deep in the playoffs have these quarterbacks on rookie contracts. Now, neither quarterback in the Super Bowl did. Jalen Hurts is not on his rookie contract. So keep that in mind for the next part of the conversation. But we've been discussing this forever. Every time Kirk would get an extension, we would talk about how they're going to build their roster. Kirk just, they're spending on Michael Pierce. They can't really go out and make big moves and fill out the big spots on the roster. And they're trying to extend everybody, and they're desperate, and their mistakes just get amplified, and et cetera, et cetera. You guys heard the song and dance a million times. And the shining light off in the distance was always they draft a guy. Always. It was like the reason to keep coming back was that someday they were going to draft this guy, and they were going to put the money in, and they were going to build this great roster, and they were going to look like what the Eagles were tonight. That was always the top of the mountain. Look it up. The Angels are singing up there. Rookie quarterback contract. If the Raiders want Darnold and McCarthy is ready, then you climb up rookie quarterback contract mountain and you finally reached it. And then you go from there. However, if he is not, and this is the whispered part that Adam Schefter said in his report, he did not say it loud, and he said it very quickly. He said, the Vikings want him back, but the Raiders want him. And I was like, wait, what? Say that part again? Say that fast part? Now, what is really hard to figure out is whether Kevin O'Connell and the Vikings want Sam Darnold back. And thank you. I do have a beautiful singing voice. Thank you. I should sing more on the show, really, especially when I'm emulating an angel talking about rookie quarterback contracts. I really should use my angelic voice to do that. But when Schefter said that part, I went, wait a minute. Do they actually want Sam Darnold back or not? This is the really big question that we don't know. And I don't feel confident enough to say, oh, no way. Because Kevin O'Connell has always believed so strongly in the idea of developing the quarterback as methodically as you possibly can. He has said, and he has been on record of saying that teams fail quarterbacks, quarterbacks don't fail teams. And coming off of this injury and just starting to get on the field at the time of the Super Bowl and needing to put on clearly a lot of weight. You saw even his interviews that he did on TV. Like, he's got to get himself into NFL shape quickly. He's got to relearn all the footwork and all those things. And then he's got to take over a team that won 14 games, and they've got to be sure that his knee is completely ready, that he's physically good to go, and that he can mentally take on all of this. Because look at the NFL. Look at how hard this is. Look at how hard these playoffs were for everybody. Look how hard it was even for Sam Darnold, how much he got beat up, how much media put him through the ringer when he lost a couple games. Same old Sam Darnold, all that. That's the main talking point, right? Like, it's hard. And Kevin O'Connell also knows that if you win 14 games one year and you win 7 the next, that means the year after that, like, you're under the gun. And think about this. The Vikings, and I'm not talking already about fired. I'm just talking about the nature of the league. They won 7 games despite losing Kirk Cousins. And the ownership of this team said, we're not giving you an extension right now. That's how much pressure exists in the NFL. So if he said, I want Sam Darnold back, hey, the same thing that happened to Herbert, Stroud, and Mahomes happened to Sam. And what we need to do is fix that offensive line and give it another shot. Run the thing back. If he said that, if that's what Kevin O'Connell wanted, I know that's not what Vikings fans want, but if that's what Kevin O'Connell wanted, it would be very hard to say for me, dude, you're wrong. We need to put in the rookie. That would be very hard to say. Now, the salary cap issue is a real one. But if we look at the quarterback who just won the Super Bowl, is Jalen Hurts, who is on a very big contract. Now, they built around him in large part through successful drafting. But it's not all through successful drafting. If you look at their contracts, A.J. Brown is a big one. They've got the offensive line. Those guys make some money. A lot of their contracts are pushed out into the future, which eventually will come to get the Philadelphia Eagles. But that's how they've made a lot of this work, aside from the great drafting, which everybody needs. So you can make it work. And the best way to make it work would be if Sam Darnold would agree to a short-term contract that had a pretty low cap hit. Even looking back at Kirk Cousins when he signed a 2-year extension, he lowered the cap hit. There was some dead cap down the road, right? This is what we've been talking about. When they first got here, they had to renegotiate Kirk Cousins' contract or work on an extension, and they did it, and they lowered the cap hit and everything. Like, they can do that for Sam Darnold if they want to. And I would rather have Sam Darnold than Daniel Jones, Mac Jones, Aaron Rodgers, any other of the quarterback, Justin Fields, any of the other quarterbacks available by 50 miles. Easily, I would rather have Darnold as the quarterback of this team. And I do think that watching these playoffs should shape a little bit more forgiveness instead of saying, well, Sam turned into a pumpkin or he wasn't ever actually any good. It was just like, I don't know. I mean, really, the thing that just happened to Patrick Mahomes happened to Sam Darnold. I'm not saying they're the same. I'm saying the same thing that happened to multiple quarterbacks this playoffs, because that's the nature of the beast now. So if you are going to agree to a contract with Darnold to 2 to 3 years, you would have to shape it in a way where they had the cap space to still do all the things that we're talking about and then pay the bill off later. That's the negative part of it, is that the bill does eventually have to get paid. The bill has to get paid down the road if they decide to do that. So when Schefter threw in that little line, well, the Vikings want him back, but I was like, but it could only happen under certain circumstances. When I was trying to figure out earlier this offseason, I tried to do an exercise where I played Rob Brzezinski on overthecap.com. And what I tried to do was I tried to make the offseason work with everything that I want for the Vikings roster. And I tried to do it with a franchise tag for Sam Darnold. And let me tell you, it was really hard. It was really hard to get done with a $41 million franchise tag. And the transition tag would help a little. That's another player probably, but that would also open it up to somebody swooping in and taking him away for nothing. So I think that if they are going to have Sam Darnold as a quarterback because they are concerned about giving JJ McCarthy more time, there's two things that I think they really need to do. One of them is to get him to agree to a short-term extension. 2 years would even work, where he gets a lot of cash, but he doesn't have a huge cap hit. And then he is okay with potentially being traded or even being as part of a quarterback competition with a tradable contract. Because if they go into the training camp and Darnold has a 2-year deal worth $85 million, but his cap hit for next year is only 15, let's just say, and then they go into training camp and McCarthy looks phenomenal and he's ready. They're just like, we got to play him. Someone will be there, maybe the Raiders still, to want Sam Darnold. You'd have to make the decision at a point in camp where he could go somewhere else and play and make it a Sam Bradford situation. But that is an option. So when Schefter did his report, he said two different parts. He said one faster and quieter, and he said the Raiders part with his whole chest. So I tended to believe that part of it. And I've still leaned so much on, like, I still think that it's a better option to move Darnold. I just am not that concerned if they bring him back, but it has to be under certain circumstances. And yes, I'm aware that, Hurts and Mahomes made the Super Bowl on their rookie deals. They also just made it on not rookie deals. Josh Allen's not on his rookie deal either. He's in the championship game. Jared Goff's not on his rookie deal. They won 15 games. Jordan Love's not on his rookie deal. They were in the playoffs. It's not like you have to just sign the player, take on the entire cap hit that moment. It does not work that way. That's not how the salary cap works. And so I think that everybody got so trained by Kirk Cousins to just scream in horror at the moment anybody ever wants any money. In fact, you guys do this for everything. You do it for Jefferson. Like when he was getting paid. No, you can't. You can't. Like, yes, you can. You can pay people. Amazon will buy more football games. I promise you. The salary cap is going up. It's not going down. There's plenty of ways to do it in a short period of time. The biggest issue with Cousins was that he would only take these fully guaranteed deals. There's no flexibility in that. And that would be the difference. There's no flexibility in having fully guaranteed extensions. And so the Vikings could not make him cheap for 1 year and then tradable or restructurable. They just had nothing. And so they tried, but they just didn't have a lot of opportunity there. The other part was, and we forget about this, around Kirk, they made a lot of terrible decisions. Just terrible decisions. And even though I fully respect somebody like Kyle Rudolph, when they extended Rudolph, like, why? It wasn't, they should have traded him. I think he would tell you they should have traded him at that point. So you can't make a bunch of bad decisions around your quarterback, but for a short period of time, you absolutely can do it. It's just, when it comes to Darnold returning, I also think that has to go along with a competition and a scenario where it is competitive, which makes it harder to get him to agree to anything. And so the only way to do that would be to say, well, we're going to tag you anyway. And then you get into some sort of game of chicken with Sam Darnold, which is not what you want. And that's why a trade to the Raiders does make the most sense for everybody if McCarthy's ready to go. That if O'Connell feels like McCarthy is ready to be QB1, trading him to the Raiders makes the most sense by far. I am always on the side of be patient, develop. Hey, by the way, you want to talk about the Super Bowl? Both of these quarterbacks, did not play in their first year. Now, neither one of them were hurt and missed an entire season and didn't get to develop, but they didn't play in their first year. And even Jalen Hurts, was it not until his second year that he played a little bit in his second year? And then it was his third year, if I'm not mistaken, with Hurts. his third year where he took him to the playoffs, his fourth year where he took him to the Super Bowl, right? They took advantage of his rookie deal. They signed him to a contract that had space. That's just a reason to not be terrified of McCarthy needing a longer development curve than he has now. So a lot to think about and process there. I need to mention that one of our sponsors, the fellas in the Super Bowl, they look great as far as their hair, but I can't say the same for all of us. So if you watch the show all the time, I'm not wearing one tonight, but I often have a hat on. And I know that some of you guys are hat guys to try to cover up hair loss. So I've got something that can help you. It is called Hims. If you've lost your hair, it doesn't mean you can't find it again. Try Hims hair loss solution, and you'll be joining hundreds of thousands of subscribers who have found their hair again. Hims makes treating hair loss very simple with clinically proven ingredients that can regrow hair in as little as 3 to 6 months. The process is simple, 100% online, so there are no uncomfortable doctor visits. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/Purple Insider. That is hims.com/Purple Insider for your personalized hair loss treatment options. Results vary based on studies of mixinil and finasteride. Prescription products require online consultation with healthcare providers who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See the website for full details and safety information. So there you go. Okay, deep breath. Let's reset where we're at right now. The offseason begins today for the Minnesota Vikings. And they'll soon have their meetings they might be underway, but they'll soon have their meetings and they'll look at who they're targeting in free agency, how they're going to handle these negotiations or conversations. And that's funny, Andy, that you're going to lose your hair over paying Sam Darnold. I know. I feel like tonight should make everybody less terrified that Sam Darnold's the quarterback. Just real quick, before I get into kind of where we're headed with all this, I don't feel like a lot of it's been fair to Sam Darnold for the fan reaction to what happened this season. Honestly, I think that he has been treated because of the way that they lost, like he was just some sort of useless placeholder that nobody wanted in the beginning. And at times I felt like everybody couldn't wait for him to fail so we could get to the offseason and move on. And after I watched Mahomes fail the way he did tonight, the best quarterback of the last decade, 2 decades, decade, I just think, you know what? It happens to a lot of quarterbacks when their offensive lines and sometimes coaches are overmatched. And he gave everything that he could to the team. He played great all season long. It came apart at the end, just like it did for a lot of teams. The NFL is harsh that way. But I don't think we need to talk about Sam Darnold as if he never could actually play and it was just some stupid lucky season and I never want to hear the name again or something like that. I just feel like a lot of it's been really mean-spirited when talking about Sam Darnold. And I just thought, I don't know, like I must have wasted my time traveling to all those games and reporting on them and doing post-game podcasts and articles if they meant nothing to Vikings fans this year. And if 2024 was just some pointless exercise for Sam Darnold, I don't like the way that a lot of it's been framed with him in these conversations about the future. I think that it's 2 very different discussions of what's the best way to approach this quarterback situation, all the moving parts, and I'm trying to keep them straight and work my way through them and the different motivations for Darnold, for the organization, the teams that might be interested, all those things. And a lot of times what it ends up coming back to is just people saying, he stinks, move on. I don't want to pay him. I'd rather lose all my hair than pay him. And you're like, okay, well, I've already kind of gone through that and how there is a scenario where if O'Connell wanted to bring him back, where they could make this work and JJ McCarthy is still your future franchise quarterback, which sounds like a pretty good situation to me. That does not sound like, wow, the Vikings are screwed if they have a guy who just played awesome and is really talented and who the locker room bought into and who Justin Jefferson played great with Oh no, like that would be horrible, right? Like I don't look at it that way. I think that it would be more challenging into the future. And, I guess, I mean, you can keep screaming, win a playoff game then, but like, I throw Herbert, trash, Stroud, trash, Stafford, trash, Mahomes, trash. Everyone who didn't win the Super Bowl, go to hell. I mean, it just gets a little frustrating sometimes. I mean, maybe you guys watch like too much debate show or something because I feel like you're saying I give Darnold too much leeway. He went effing 14-3, man. He threw for 377 yards against the Packers at home and put them in a position to play for the number one seed. It's just so funny how I think blinded with rage everyone still is about how that worked out, even though so many other teams had the same exact thing happen to them where they were outmatched on the offensive line. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry if the mic is cracking a little bit. I apologize for that. Am I yelling too loud, you think? Is that it? Thanks for letting me know, Jared, but I apologize if that's the case. Sorry about that. Maybe the did it just start? Maybe the yelling was part of it. So anyway, the point just being that, yeah, I mean, Robert comes in with Sam Darnold. Yeah, okay. I mean, sure. Very, very smart take. Very smart take. I mean, it just, yeah, it got really tiresome and it got really unfair to him. And I just think that it's two very different discussions of how you want to go forward with this. And also, what he did for the Minnesota Vikings this year and also his talent. I mean, there's no denying this was not a Case Keenum situation. There is no denying that when it came to Sam Darnold, that it was not fluky. It was him playing extremely well. And, I saw too, I saw too that get off my high horse. Oh, okay. I mean, I'm telling you my perspective on the harsh commentary. Oh, you think it's a connection issue? Really? Yeah, that could be. Or maybe everyone's going live after the Super Bowl. So I appreciate you guys working through it. Try to readjust the sound a little here. Maybe turn it down a bit. Maybe turn the mic down a bit. Maybe that'll work. Anyway, it's funny, right? Like, so I'm saying that I think it's really unfair to a quarterback who played great. All the stats point to that. All the stats point to that. All the games pointed to that. And then I get told that I'm on my high horse. It's like, you just can't win with this. Everybody who didn't win the Super Bowl is trash and should be ashamed of themselves. I get it. That's how football works. It's how it's always going to work. I just think that when it comes to Sam Darnold, that the way that it was framed by Adam Schefter is that there's still a possibility that he could be the quarterback next year. And I'm already sort of bracing myself for the possibility that it happens. And then every single time I talk about the team, I just get lambasted with every person who hates him more than life itself because there's another quarterback they drafted that you've all convinced yourself is the next great quarterback in the league, which he might be. And I was very impressed with him. So, yeah, I mean, the other thing is too, like, sometimes we act like Sam Darnold just had this magical supporting cast and it had nothing to do with him. And I don't like that either because when I look around, I go, that was not a great offensive line. It was good coaching. It's one great receiver. It's another pretty good receiver. It was 3/4 of TJ Hawkinson. I mean, Scramping around says it's fair to adjust perspective on Darnold. I agree with that. I do agree with that after tonight. I do agree with that. When it happened to so many different quarterbacks, the league shifts all the time. And one of the most fascinating things to me about football is that it's always changing. It's always like adjusting and GDP. Thank you for the super chat. Appreciate you very much. I mean, it's always changing and adjusting, right? And this year, what we saw, a very clear trend that played out right in front of us tonight, was that if you've got the defensive line, if you've got a great strategy on defense, you're going to win. I mean, I'm not saying defense and running wins championships. Jalen Hurts threw the ball well tonight to win a championship, but that edge has widened. That edge has grown wider than it's been, I think, in a long time. If you have a great D line versus the offensive lines are not able to keep up. And I was looking at this, I did an article on this, and I looked at the PFF grades for offensive linemen and the pressures allowed, even back in 2017, 2016. Think about this. In 2016, Alex Boone gave up 16 quarterback pressures, and everybody wanted him out of town. And he was graded as an above average pass blocker, and everybody considered that to just not be all that good of a signing, right? And when it came to this year, if Alex Boone's performance from 2016 was this year, he would have been one of the top 15 guards in the league. That's how much different it is trying to pass protect as a guard now than it was even a few years ago. This is even when I just started covering the Vikings in 2016. And so I think when you combine that knowledge with what happened to the Vikings in the playoffs, and you realize, like, if you've got that big of an advantage, D-line versus O-line, your guys don't have much of a chance. I mean, if that's how it's going to be, then the Vikings have to adjust around their quarterback. But we also can't just point to the quarterback and say it's all his fault. He's no good. Screw him. Get him out of town. I don't ever want to see him again. All the stuff that I've seen for weeks and weeks, when it's so clear that this trend is part of what caused the Vikings to lose in the playoffs and caused Darnold to play as badly as he did. And Jam Slam says those players were worse in their losses, and Jared Goff is thrown in there too. And I agree that they were just as bad or worse in their losses. So that's why when I look at Sam Darnold, I look at the whole picture on his season and the way that he played in a lot of important moments, in a lot of key games, and the way that he was able to lead that team in the locker room and get everybody to buy into him, the way he worked with Kevin O'Connell. And you guys are just trolling me now. About Daniel Jones. There's not a whole lot similar about Daniel Jones and Sam Darnold. But anyway, the point just being that I think we need to give a little bit of a wider perspective on Sam Darnold than just he lost that game. Don't ever pay him. He's too expensive, which you don't even know what exactly contract they're going to be able to work out. But you've already decided that Sam Darnold is too expensive, even though you don't know what sort of contract they're going to work out, and that is short term. And as far as Darnold, it's so funny because whenever I talk about it and I lay out the stats, the salary cap, and how it would work, and how you could negotiate a certain type of contract with him for next year, and how and all those things, and the potential benefit for JJ McCarthy, like all this stuff, it's all what? It's all pretty rational and black and white, right? And then what? And then I get told, well, why do you love him so much? It's like, what are you, 6? What are we, 6? Come on, guys. I think that the disappointment of the last game was so intense. And also the dream of the promised angels on top of the mountain with the rookie contract is so intense. And people have looked forward to it for a long time that you really want it now. And I'm not against it at all. I am not against it at all if they move on to JJ McCarthy. I mean, I don't know where that would even come from, that I would be against that. Like, if he's ready to go, then he's ready to go. But, I think we've probably just reached the point where I'm just like being endlessly trolled. So we should probably just call it a night. But anyway, the whole takeaway from this evening was, when it comes to Sam Darnold, the Raiders are at the top of the list, which to me says that there could be an opportunity there for the Vikings, for the most desperate team, the Raiders, to potentially trade a draft pick for this year, which the Vikings could really use. And I've felt like the landscape for Darnold is going to be pretty robust. Like there should be multiple teams that can be potentially in on a trade for Darnold, which the Vikings could take advantage of. So hearing Schefter say that makes me more confident in that idea, that is of high potential for the Vikings if they want to move on from him. And the other takeaway is that D-lines are crushing. They're crushing. And the Vikings need to get on the right side of that on both sides of the ball. But I really think that the defensive tackle position, it's time. It's just been so long with that. And the other part is that, yes, you do need to look at the Rams' loss through a different lens after seeing the same thing happen to Patrick Mahomes. You do need to look at that performance from Sam Darnold differently. Now, I know that all of you guys want him out, and no matter what I say, it's just never going to matter. So you show up anyway and troll me, and that's okay. I guess it's America. You can, or wherever you're from, you can. That's your right on the internet. But I also think it's the right thing to do to lay out this whole situation in its entirety, in the full picture of this decision that the Vikings are going to have to make a quarterback, rather than just screaming to high heaven that he should get out. So we'll see how it plays out. I mean, the offseason that starts now officially. We've been in offseason mode for a couple weeks, but it really starts now. The decisions the Vikings are going to have to make. And I suggest going over to purpleinsider.football. Yeah, I mean, look, with the Daniel Jones point, he was so much worse in his last 2 seasons, so much more injured, so much worse than Sam Darnold had been in his recent performance, and never had the talent of Sam Darnold. So just saying, oh, he'll just do the same thing if they need him as a bridge, to me is dubious. That's the point. So, but anyway, there's just no way to make this point without having a bunch of people like come at me like angry hornets. So I guess I will have to deal with that every time I talk about anything. But as far as Matt says, what comes next is probably a Kwesi Adofo-Mensah extension, which we're still waiting on. And I have said, and will continue to say, that I'm not thinking about it too much as far as, well, it, might not happen or whatever until we get to the NFL Combine. If Kwesi Adofo-Mensah does not have a contract extension by the Combine, then I'm going to think it's a little bizarre, because it's already been almost a month, 3 weeks, has been 3 weeks since Kevin O'Connell signed his extension. I think probably 3 weeks. And we still kind of have nothing, even though Schefter reported that they were negotiating. So it's not raising red flags for me. Negotiations take time. People go on vacations. Hey, we don't have it done. We'll address it when we come back or something. But if they get to the point where everybody's in the same building and they're not getting it done, then it becomes a little bit curious. So I think that's the next thing to keep an eye out for. And then after that, which probably should be an article for me, which is who's coming back, because they can start negotiating with players. It's more likely to happen when we get closer to the Combine or at the Combine, but they can start negotiating anytime they want with their free agents. And would they want to bring back Bynum? Would they want to bring back Byron Murphy? Like, who's coming back is also a big question. Aaron Jones is another big question. So, I think that we'll keep an eye on those things. They more likely happen when we get to the Combine, but that's kind of a next step. Steven, do I have concerns about Dallas Turner? I mean, it's like levels of concern. Certainly yes, after the first season where he does not put on the type of performance that I expected. But when we talk about concerns, it's, well, I need to see his full offseason and then another year, because there are so many young players who come into the league. They're not physically ready. He was one of the youngest players in the league this year. And then they take a big step for the next season, and all of a sudden you're sort of off and running, right? That's what I expect from Dallas Turner, to get into NFL shape, to grow, to develop, to take all the things that he learned from this year and be better next year, and to step into Patrick Jones's type of role and play 40, 50 snaps a game, mixing in, rotating, actually give Andrew Van Ginkel a rest sometimes, give Jonathan Grenard a rest sometimes. But it's a little awkward when you have two players that are so great at the same position that he plays in. They couldn't just let him go, rep after rep after rep. He kind of had to slide in. Brian says Bynum's too expensive for mediocre play. I don't agree with mediocre. I think he's been an above average safety for 2 years, and he's also played over 1,000 snaps. So, I think he's good and a guy that I would want to re-sign, but I don't think that he's worth one of the top dollar figures at that position. That would just be too difficult. And if other teams want to come in and overpay him, then unfortunately you'd probably have to move on. There's also a lot of other safety options aside from Cam Bynum, and that has to be considered as well, that there's 5, 6, 7 other free agents that are there that they could potentially go after. As far as you guys, as far as your trolling, I mean, I think that I use the term trolling fairly loosely, but it really is sometimes frustrating to slam my head up against the same wall when we're talking about this. And look, it's gone that way for a lot of things over the years. I mean, the Justin Jefferson trade stuff was really ridiculous last year, but every single time that I talked about it, it would be like 100 people saying, no, we should trade him for draft picks. I'm like, no, you shouldn't. So anyway, that's sort of the nature of the business. We have to talk about the same thing a lot until we get answers. Is Flores back? Yeah, Flores will be back. Yep. And Bat, I know you're saying that Sam Darnold at 40 million versus 10 million is a difference, but my whole point in laying it out is that if they're going to bring Darnold back because they don't think JJ is ready right away, that what they would try to do is sign him to a contract that would allow them to not have a $40 million cap hit for this year. It's a key part of it. There's a checklist that they have to go through if they are going to do something like bringing back Darnold on a short-term deal. Like, they have to be sure that they could trade him if they felt great about where JJ was. They would have to be sure that his cap hit would still allow him to get these defensive tackles and guards we're obsessing over. Like, these are must-haves. These are absolute musts to bring him back. And when it's still being said out there by Pelissero, by Schefter, by Fowler, there's still the insiders are leaving that door open. I can't shut the door on it when that's what's happening. And so I'm laying it out to you guys of all the different ways that this could end up playing out and how it could actually work. If the Vikings put the franchise tag on him, it's going to be very hard to fill out the roster the way that they need to do it to actually compete. It will be. I tried it. It's going to be hard, and you can restructure and you can extend and you can do a lot of stuff. And it does come back to the drafting, where they haven't got these guys on these super cheap contracts that you could just throw somebody in there that's expensive. So it would need to be able to where they could still follow the general path and then plan to move on from Darnold the next season. So yeah, somebody points out that Dak is making 60. Well, that's the thing, right? He's not really making 60 because nobody's really making at quarterback on the salary cap what their average annual value says, which is part of the discussion. Did Trey Smith's stock drop tonight? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that Trey Smith, if he hits the market, will still demand over $20 million. And I am not for that. I think he's the best free agent. He's a phenomenal player. But if you put all of your eggs in the one basket of a guard and you try to patchwork the other positions, you're still going to have the same problem of defenses attacking the other spots. It was so clear that teams were attacking Cam Robinson and Blake Brandel because they hadn't played together and Brandel's a backup. And that's the caliber of player he is. It's not an insult. It's just a reality. They gave him a chance to play as a starter and it didn't work out. And so teams just attacked that over and over again. And they had a lot of success doing so. If you bring in Trey Smith at $20 million, and you saw the Eagles do that tonight, they had matchups where it didn't even matter what Trey Smith was doing, that they had matchups that they were going to win. So I've always kind of leaned toward, I'd rather see them get 2 or 3 guys as opposed to just one. As far as tagging Darnold, unless they have a trade in place, well, yeah, that's what the combine is for. The combine is for having those discussions and trying to find out, is a team really interested? Is the Raiders really interested? I mean, I think Adam Schefter putting it out there is no mistake. I mean, if the Vikings didn't already know, then they certainly know after Schefter reported it that they're interested. Are you going to tag them? Are you going to trade them to us? I mean, it's out there now if it wasn't already clear before. So they'll have those discussions and they will leave the combine. I guarantee it. They will leave the combine knowing exactly what they can get for Sam Darnold in a trade and how many teams would be interested and what would have to happen and what their potential return would be. I don't like the option of just the franchise tag and then try to ruin the cap into the future. It's possible, but it's not good. So there's really only a couple paths that this can go. It's tag him and trade him, or it's sign a short-term contract that he's okay with potentially being traded after next season. That's really it. And you guys are not wrong in making the comparison from Jeff George to Dante Culpepper. And I'm sure that at that time, there were a lot of people who were hesitant about throwing Dante Culpepper into the mix. Jeff George had just had a really good year. I mean, it's certainly a reasonable thing. And that's the other thing is there's a lot of reasonable reasons to move on from Sam Darnold and onto JJ McCarthy. But when it comes to the potential of Darnold coming back until he's gone, it's still on the table, which means that I think we need to talk about how that could potentially happen and what it would look like and what they'd have to do. And I mean, right now I'm staying with where I was. I still think it's 60-40 that JJ McCarthy is starting next season. I'm not moving that after Schefter reported it, but maybe it brings it more into light. Like, here's a very clear team that could be making a significant offer for Sam Darnold. So we'll see. Let me just put a bow on the evening. Thank you all for tuning in, watching, and listening. I appreciate it. It's been largely an enjoyable discussion, but I'm still so disappointed by the Super Bowl. I mean, if I'm not covering the Vikings in the Super Bowl, I would very much prefer to. I made fajitas tonight. I got, the steak and I cooked it all up and had my big Super Bowl meal. I'm all ready to go. Got some Pringles. Of course, Diet Dr. Pepper's in the mix. And I'm all like super pumped like everybody else to watch the game. I don't know. What point did you guys know it was over? Because to me, it was like the first 3 drives. Like, oh boy, they're not going to be able to stop the Eagles and they're not going to be able to move the ball. And then it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And there were no real upside to anybody who's not an Eagles fan. So it was pretty disappointing. One of the most disappointing nights of football that I can remember. I mean, there's been bad Super Bowls, but this was just, it goes up there in the annals of the all-time. At very least, we don't have to talk about the refs again until another team wins a lot of games, and then people think that it's rigged for them. So anyhow, yeah, the pick 6, the second interception, it was just over so fast, so disappointing. And I feel bad that that's the last taste of football we get for a really long time. But there's a lot of great and interesting things to talk about going forward. So the show never stops. The discussion never stops. The guests never stop. Got a new intern to introduce to you guys tomorrow night. We're going to have a roundtable. And then at the end of that, we'll introduce our new intern. He's going to be writing for purpleinsider.football. So I'm excited to bring on another intern and sort of show him the way. Had a lot of success with that in the past. So there's a lot to look forward to. We got free agency. I'm starting the draft prep. There's combine. I'll be going as always, right around the corner, owners meetings, all those things. So it's going to be pretty good, but we'll have a lot to talk about and we'll have fun into the future. So thanks everybody for taking the time to watch and listen. And tomorrow night roundtable with myself, Manny Hill, and Brian Murphy to kind of break down what we saw and really, really, truly preview the big decisions for the Minnesota Vikings going forward. So thanks so much, everybody. And sorry it wasn't better. And we'll talk to y'all later. Football.